Don't do it, but the rancher did, and he lived to regret it. Wild West stories. Among the residents, one man stood out, not for wealth or fame, but for his steady, dependable nature. His name was Jed McAllister, a rancher who had spent his entire life working the land. He knew the patterns of the seasons, the sounds of the wind, and the ways of the cattle better than anyone else in the region. Jed's ranch lay on the edge of town, stretching over rolling hills and golden fields. His mornings always began the same way. Before the sun was fully up, he would saddle his horse, check the fences, and walk among his cattle to make sure they were healthy. It was a life of routine, but for Jed, routine brought a sense of peace. He had known hardship, droughts that shriveled crops, storms that tore through fences, and the occasional encounter with thieves or wild animals. But he faced each challenge with calm and determination. People in Red Creek admired him for this, not just because he worked hard, but because he carried himself with quiet dignity. On this particular morning, Jed felt a familiar tug of unease as he glanced toward the canyon that bordered his land. The canyon had been there for as long as anyone could remember, its steep cliffs rising sharply and casting long shadows over the plains. The townspeople often spoke of it in hushed tones, sharing stories about the dangers lurking within, wild animals, unstable rocks, or worse. Some even whispered of it being cursed, though Jed had never believed in such tales. "It's just rocks and wind," he muttered to himself as he adjusted his hat. "Nothing to worry about." But Jed was not a man who let fear guide his actions. He had faced rattlesnakes, wild bulls, and treacherous weather without flinching. He had seen enough of life to know that courage and caution must coexist, but in this moment, his confidence outweighed his concern. He patted the neck of his horse, a strong, dark brown stallion named Dusty, and whispered, "Let's see what's going on near the canyon, old friend." The cattle appeared restless, their low moans carried on the wind. Jed squinted at the distant cliffs, scanning for any unusual movement. He knew that something was amiss, though he could not yet say what. It could be nothing, he thought, just the cattle reacting to the early morning chill, or perhaps a coyote lurking nearby. Yet the unease remained, and Jed knew that sometimes even small problems could escalate if not addressed quickly. Jed spent the next hour moving among his cattle, checking each one for signs of illness or injury. He rubbed a rough hand along the neck of a calf, feeling its warmth and steady breathing. Everything seemed normal at first, yet a nagging thought lingered. He had a hunch that something more serious might be waiting for him near the canyon, and he resolved to investigate further. It was not recklessness that drove him, but responsibility. The land and animals depended on him, and he could not ignore that duty. As he rode closer to the canyon, the terrain became rougher. Dust kicked up around Dusty's hooves, and the sound of the wind grew louder as it swept through the narrow gaps between rocks. Jed's mind wandered to the stories he had heard as a boy, old tales told by settlers and travelers about strange events near the cliffs. People spoke of sudden rockslides, of wild animals attacking without warning, and of men who had ventured too close and never returned. Jed had always dismissed these stories as exaggerations. Still, today, he felt a chill run down his spine. He paused for a moment, resting Dusty and surveying the canyon below. The cliffs loomed large and forbidding, the rocks jagged and uneven. A small creek ran through the bottom, its water glinting in the early morning sun. Jed dismounted, patting his horse and tying it to a sturdy tree. He knew he would need both hands if he was to examine the area carefully. Dusty stood patiently, snorting softly, as if sensing the tension in Jed's movements. Jed began to move closer to the edge, careful with each step. The ground beneath him was uneven, scattered with loose stones and patches of dry grass. He remembered the warning of a neighbor from the previous week, old Mr. Harris, who had stopped him in town. "Jed," he had said, leaning heavily on his cane, "be careful near that canyon. Things aren't always what they seem out there. Don't do it." Jed had smiled politely, nodding but not speaking. He respected Mr. Harris, but he also knew that the old man had a tendency to worry excessively. Jed had thought the warning unnecessary, yet now, standing on the edge, he could understand why the caution had been given. Despite the sense of danger, Jed pressed on. He spotted a small group of his cattle grazing near the cliff, unusually close to the edge. One of the bulls, larger than the others, was pawing the ground and snorting, restless and agitated. Jed's heart quickened. He knew that if the animals panicked, they could easily fall, leading to serious injury or death. He whistled softly, calling to them, and approached cautiously. The cattle turned toward him, but the bull in particular did not seem to calm. Its eyes were wild and it tossed its head, clearly upset by something unseen. Jed took a deep breath, reminding himself that he had faced worse. He stepped forward, holding out his hands to soothe the animals, speaking in a low, calm voice. Slowly, the tension in the air seemed to lessen, though the bull remained wary. Jed knew he would need to act carefully to lead the cattle back to safer ground. One wrong move, and the situation could turn dangerous very quickly. As he guided the animals away from the cliff, Jed's thoughts returned to the warnings. He realized that there was a difference between the tales of fear told in town and the real dangers he now faced. The canyon was beautiful, awe-inspiring even, but it was also unforgiving. Every step required caution. Every movement had consequences. Jed felt a strange mix of pride and apprehension. He was proud of his ability to handle the situation, yet he also understood that nature was unpredictable, and respect for it was essential. The morning continued, the sun climbing higher in the sky. Jed managed to get the cattle safely away from the cliff, leading them back toward a flatter, more secure area of his ranch. Dusty followed closely, his hooves kicking up dust, ears alert to every sound. Jed paused for a moment, surveying the canyon from a safer distance. The danger had passed for now, but he knew that the morning had shown him a glimpse of what could happen if he ignored the land's subtle warnings. As he led the last of his cattle back toward the corral, Jed could not shake the feeling that the canyon was watching him, silent and patient, holding its secrets close. He returned to his chores, repairing fences and checking water troughs, yet the unease lingered in the back of his mind. He had faced many challenges in his life, but the canyon had reminded him that caution was as important as courage. By midday, Jed had finished his work, and the town of Red Creek was fully awake. People moved about their daily routines, unaware of the quiet tension that had passed on the outskirts of town. Jed sat on the porch of his small cabin, wiping sweat from his brow, reflecting on the morning. He realized that life on the ranch was not just about hard work, but also about awareness and respect for the world around him. He had been lucky today, and he knew it. Still, Jed's pride remained. He was a man who trusted his instincts, a man who faced challenges head-on. And yet, deep down, he understood that the canyon was more than just a stretch of rock and dirt. It was a reminder that the Wild West could be as dangerous as it was beautiful. The stories he had heard as a boy were not just tales, they were lessons in disguise. Jed leaned back, taking a slow sip of water, and looked toward the distant cliffs once more. He had survived the morning without incident, yet he knew that the real test was not over. Life on the ranch was unpredictable, and the canyon had already shown its power. Jed could feel it in his bones. The next time, he would have to be even more careful, or he might not be so fortunate. As the sun continued its climb, the wind picked up, carrying the faint sounds of the creek below. Jed sat silently, letting the warmth of the day wash over him. He had faced the challenge and had won for now, but the canyon remained, silent and imposing, a reminder of the limits even the strongest man could not ignore. Jed woke the next morning before the sun had even begun to rise. The air was cool and crisp, and a soft mist hung over the ranch. The events of the previous day weighed heavily on his mind. He had managed to keep his cattle safe, but the uneasy feeling in his chest had not gone away. The canyon seemed larger now, darker somehow, and he could not stop thinking about the strange restlessness of the bull near the cliff. Every part of him told him to be cautious. Yet, as he saddled Dusty, he felt the familiar pull of determination. He had a responsibility to check his land thoroughly, and he could not ignore the warning signs. Jed rode out slowly, listening to the soft rhythm of Dusty's hooves against the earth. The town was still asleep, and the silence of the early morning made the ranch feel almost otherworldly. Jed's eyes kept returning to the canyon in the distance. He remembered Mr. Harris's words, the neighbor's shaky voice warning him, Don't do it." Jed had nodded politely, dismissing the warning as old fear. But now, standing on the outskirts of his land, he understood why people were cautious. The canyon had a way of demanding respect, and it was clear that anyone who underestimated it could be in trouble. As he approached the rocky edges, Jed noticed something unusual. The ground near the cliff's edge was disturbed, as though something had been moving there during the night. Small footprints were scattered across the dirt, and broken branches littered the area. His curiosity was piqued. What could have caused this? A wild animal, or perhaps the cattle had wandered closer than he thought. Jed dismounted and crouched to inspect the marks. The prints were larger than a deer S, but not as wide as a bear S. He could not immediately identify them. He paused, listening carefully. The wind whistled through the cliffs, carrying faint sounds that he could not immediately place. A low growl reached his ears from the canyon floor, subtle but distinct. Jed's pulse quickened, yet he did not feel fear in the usual sense. Instead, he felt a mix of curiosity and determination. He needed to find out what was happening. The safety of his herd depended on it. He had faced dangerous situations before and had come out stronger each time. He reminded himself that he was capable, careful, and strong. Jed tied Dusty to a nearby tree and moved closer to the canyon edge on foot. The ground was uneven and treacherous, and he had to take careful steps to avoid slipping. As he got nearer, he could see the herd below, but it was not in danger yet. The bull, however, was restless and pawing the ground, much like the previous day. Its loud snorts echoed against the cliffs, startling Jed. He crouched behind a rock, observing the bull, and tried to figure out the best way to lead it back safely. The canyon was more intimidating up close. The cliffs rose sharply, jagged and uneven, casting long shadows over the rocky floor. Jed could see that there were narrow paths and steep drops, places where a misstep could mean serious injury. Yet he pressed on. He was confident in his abilities, and he knew that hesitation now could make matters worse. He carefully approached the herd, speaking softly to calm them. The bull's eyes flicked toward him, muscles tensing as if ready to charge. Jed held his ground, speaking in a low, steady voice. For a moment, nothing happened. The bull shifted its weight but did not attack. Jed felt a small sense of relief, but it was fleeting. He realized that the animal was frightened, not aggressive, and that his careful approach was helping. Yet as he guided the herd slowly back toward safer ground, he noticed another danger. The ground beneath the bull was cracking slightly. Small rocks shifted, and a faint rumble echoed through the canyon. Jed froze, understanding immediately that the cliff edge was unstable. One wrong move could send the bull tumbling down. He acted quickly, trying to redirect the animal toward a more solid path. His heart pounded in his chest as he moved with calculated steps, guiding the bull with gentle pressure and steady words. Dusty, sensing the tension, remained calm but alert. The rest of the herd followed Jed's lead, moving carefully along the safer path. Jed could feel the wind picking up, the sound of loose rocks sliding faintly under the force of the current air. Every second mattered, and he had to maintain his focus. As the herd began to move to safer ground, Jed's thoughts wandered briefly to the warnings he had ignored. Mr. Harris had been right. The canyon was dangerous, and anyone venturing too close without respect could easily get hurt. Jed shook his head slightly, feeling a mixture of pride and frustration. He had handled the situation well so far, but the incident was a clear reminder that even the most experienced rancher could be at risk. Nature was unpredictable, and overconfidence could have serious consequences. After several tense minutes, Jed finally got the herd to a flat, secure area. The cattle were calmer now, grazing and moving slowly, while the bull had settled down. Jed wiped sweat from his brow and took a deep breath. He felt a small sense of victory but also a lingering unease. He knew that the canyon was not done testing him. The signs were there, the disturbed ground, the restless bull, and the faint growl in the distance. Jed realized that the situation was far from ordinary. Something was different this time, and he could not ignore it. He took a moment to examine the bull closely. Its muscles were tense, eyes darting toward the shadows. Jed understood that the animal was reacting to something he could not see. He scanned the cliffs, searching for movement, for anything unusual. The canyon seemed alive, holding its secrets tightly. Jed felt a chill, not from the wind, but from the realization that he was stepping into unknown territory. Yet he could not turn back. Responsibility for his cattle demanded that he continue. Jed decided to follow the bull slightly, keeping a safe distance but observing its behavior. The ground became more rugged, and the path narrower. Loose stones crunched under his boots, echoing against the cliffs. He noticed more tracks, similar to the ones he had seen earlier. They were scattered and large, suggesting the presence of a wild animal. Jed's instincts told him to be careful, but curiosity pushed him forward. He reminded himself that he had handled danger before, and he trusted his experience. Hours passed as Jed carefully moved through the canyon. The sun climbed higher, casting light and shadows that shifted with each passing moment. The canyon seemed endless, winding and twisting in ways that made it hard to see far ahead. Jed realized that he was deeper than he had intended, but he could not turn back without first understanding the situation. The herd was safer now, but the bull's agitation indicated that something unseen was disturbing them. Jed's attention remained sharp, every sound and movement analyzed carefully. Suddenly, Jed heard a rustling above him. He looked up quickly and saw a shadow move across the cliff. The sound was faint but unmistakable. His heart rate increased, and he instinctively took a step back. Dusty, tied nearby, snorted and stamped his hooves nervously. Jed knew that whatever had caused the disturbance could pose a real threat. He reminded himself to stay calm, move deliberately, and avoid sudden actions. Panic could make a bad situation worse. Jed took a few moments to consider his next steps. He could turn back immediately, leaving the canyon behind, but that would mean abandoning his investigation. If there was a real danger to the herd, he needed to know what it was. His sense of duty outweighed his fear. He adjusted his stance, ready for anything, and moved cautiously toward the source of the disturbance. Each step was deliberate, every movement slow and careful. He had learned that patience was as important as courage in situations like this. As he moved closer, Jed's mind replayed the warnings he had ignored. Don't do it," Mr. Harris had said. The words echoed in his mind, a reminder that the canyon was not just a place of beauty, but also a place of hidden risk. Jed understood that respect for nature was essential. The morning had already shown him signs of danger, and now, deeper in the canyon, he felt the true weight of that lesson. Yet he pressed on, determined to uncover the mystery, confident that his experience and careful attention would guide him safely. By midday, Jed had explored much of the canyon's edge. He had guided the herd to safety, observed the movements of the bull, and noted the strange tracks scattered across the rocks. Still, a sense of unease lingered. The canyon held secrets, and Jed knew that he was only beginning to understand them. As he paused to rest, sitting on a flat rock and taking a slow sip of water, he realized that the canyon demanded respect and careful attention. It was beautiful, powerful, and dangerous, a place where one wrong step could change everything. Jed took a deep breath, feeling the wind on his face, the warmth of the sun on his back. He had faced challenges before, but the canyon was different. It was a test of patience, observation, and courage. He resolved to continue carefully, to respect the signs, and to guide his cattle safely home. The morning had been a warning, and he would heed it. Yet, in the back of his mind, a small voice whispered that the canyon was far from done, and the true challenge was still ahead. Jed's heart beat faster than usual as he moved deeper into the canyon. The morning sun had climbed high, casting sharp shadows across the jagged rocks. Every sound, the whisper of the wind, the distant call of a bird, the faint crunch of gravel underfoot, made him tense. He knew the canyon held dangers he could not yet see, and he could feel it in the way the air seemed heavier, the way the rocks seemed to loom closer. Yet he pressed on. His pride and determination pushed him forward, even as a small voice inside warned him to be careful. The bull, which had been restless near the cliff edge, now seemed more agitated. Its deep, low snorts echoed against the rock walls, sending vibrations through the ground. Jed watched carefully, noticing the way the bull's ears twitched and its head moved rapidly, following something he could not see. Jed realized that the animal was sensing something in the canyon, something beyond human perception. He took a careful step closer, speaking softly in a calm, steady voice. The bull paused for a moment, its dark eyes locking onto him. Jed felt a strange mix of fear and admiration. The animal was powerful, wild, and unpredictable. Jed moved slowly, keeping his distance, yet trying to guide the bull away from the dangerous cliff edges. The canyon floor was uneven, covered in loose stones and patches of dry grass that made every step risky. One misstep could cause him to slip or fall, and the thought of that made his stomach tighten. But he reminded himself of his experience. He had faced storms, wild animals, and unpredictable weather before. He had survived dangers that would have scared many men, and he trusted his instincts to guide him now. As he walked, Jed noticed a small opening in the rock wall, partially hidden by shadows. A faint sound came from inside, almost like a soft growl mixed with the whisper of moving stones. Jed's curiosity got the better of him. He had always been a man who sought understanding, who wanted to see the world as it truly was rather than accepting stories or rumors. He approached the opening slowly, keeping his eyes on the bull and the rest of the herd. Dusty, tied nearby, watched him nervously, ears flicking back and forth. Jed could feel the tension in the air, as if the canyon itself was holding its breath. Stepping closer to the opening, Jed saw movement inside. At first, it was too dark to make out clearly, but as his eyes adjusted, he realized it was not a wild animal, but something much more dangerous. The terrain itself was unstable. Loose rocks shifted slightly, as though threatening to fall at any moment. Jed realized that if he stepped too far forward, he could trigger a rock slide or get trapped. His pulse quickened, and he felt a shiver run down his spine. Yet he could not turn back now. He had to understand the danger fully to protect his herd and himself. Jed crouched low, moving carefully among the rocks, keeping his balance. Every movement was deliberate. He tested each step before committing his weight, aware that the canyon was merciless to the careless. The wind picked up, carrying dust and small pebbles that brushed against his skin. He could hear faint sounds of shifting rocks, the canyon responding to his presence. Jed felt a thrill of fear mixed with excitement. He had faced risks before, but this felt different. The canyon demanded respect, and he understood that one wrong decision could change everything. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the canyon. Jed froze, listening. Dust and small stones tumbled from above, and the bull jumped back in alarm. Jed realized immediately that the ground above him had shifted. A small rock slide had begun, and if it continued, it could become deadly. He moved quickly, finding a safer spot behind a large boulder. His heart raced, but his mind remained focused. He knew that panic could lead to mistakes, and mistakes here could be fatal. From his hiding place, Jed watched as the loose rocks fell, narrowly missing him. The bull, sensing danger, ran toward him, and Jed held out his hands to calm it. Slowly, the animal settled, though it remained tense. Jed understood that both he and the bull had been lucky. The canyon was teaching him a lesson, and he realized that he could not ignore its warnings any longer. Respect, caution, and patience were just as important as courage. Jed continued forward, but with greater care. He kept the bull and the rest of the herd in view, guiding them to safer ground. The canyon floor twisted and turned, narrow paths opening and closing like a maze. Jed's eyes scanned constantly, watching for any signs of instability. Loose stones, cracks in the rocks, and shifting shadows demanded his attention. He felt sweat running down his back, not from heat alone, but from the intensity of the situation. Each step required full focus, and even a momentary distraction could be disastrous. As he moved deeper, Jed noticed another unusual sign. A section of the cliff appeared to have been disturbed recently. Large stones had fallen, and the earth seemed softer than expected. He could see faint claw marks on some rocks, suggesting that an animal or something else had passed through. Jed's mind raced, considering possibilities. Could it be a mountain lion, or perhaps a wild bear? The thought of encountering a dangerous animal made him even more alert. He whispered softly to himself, reminding himself to stay calm. Suddenly, a sharp sound cracked through the air, a rock breaking under weight. Jed froze and looked up. A boulder was slowly dislodging from the cliff above. Without thinking, he shouted a warning to the bull and the other cattle. The animals reacted instantly, moving away from the danger. Jed sprang to the side, narrowly avoiding the falling stone. Dusty whinnied loudly, startled, and Jed patted him to calm the horse. His heart pounded, and he realized that he had underestimated the canyon. It was more dangerous than he had imagined, and the warning signs from the previous day had been just the beginning. Jed took a moment to catch his breath, leaning against a sturdy rock. He scanned the area carefully, noting every crack, shadow, and movement. The canyon was alive with potential danger, but he also saw opportunities. He could guide the herd safely if he stayed focused and cautious. He reminded himself of the responsibility he carried. The cattle depended on him, and he could not afford to make mistakes. The canyon was testing him, and he knew he had to respect it fully. As he moved forward again, Jed came across a narrow ledge that overlooked a steep drop. The sight made his stomach churn. Below, rocks jutted out like jagged teeth, and any fall would be fatal. He carefully stepped onto the ledge, feeling the weight of the loose earth beneath his boots. The bull followed at a safe distance, trusting Jed's guidance. Every step was deliberate, calculated, and careful. Jed knew that rushing now could undo all his previous efforts. He moved slowly, speaking softly to the animals, using calm words to keep them steady. Halfway across the ledge, Jed spotted a narrow path that seemed safer, leading to a flat area further in the canyon. Relief washed over him, but it was mixed with caution. He knew that the canyon could change in an instant, and he could not assume the path was entirely safe. Carefully, he guided the bull and the herd toward the flat area, keeping an eye on every loose stone and shifting shadow. Dust kicked up around their hooves, and the wind carried the sounds of movement from above. Jed felt every nerve on edge, fully alert to the canyon's signals. By late morning, Jed had reached the flat area with the herd largely safe for now. He allowed himself a brief pause, catching his breath and surveying the canyon around him. The air was filled with tension and quiet energy, as though the rocks themselves were watching him. Jed understood that he had survived the first real test, but the canyon had more in store. He could feel it, a subtle warning in the wind and the shadows. This was only the beginning, and the challenge ahead would require all his skill, patience, and courage. Jed sat on a rock, resting for a moment, and thought about the warnings he had received. Don't do it," Mr. Harris had said. The words repeated in his mind. Jed realized that pride and experience were valuable, but respect and caution were even more important. He had survived, but barely. The canyon had shown him that nature was powerful and unpredictable, and that even a skilled rancher could face danger if he ignored the signs. With renewed determination, Jed rose, ready to guide the herd further, knowing that the canyon demanded respect and careful attention. Each step forward was deliberate, each movement calculated. The morning had been a warning, the first test of the canyon's power, and Jed understood that the true challenge was yet to come. Jed had guided the herd to the flat area safely, but a deep unease had settled over him. The canyon was unpredictable, alive with hidden dangers, and he knew that even a single mistake could be disastrous. The sun was high now, casting bright light on the rocky cliffs and long shadows across the uneven ground. Jed's muscles ached from the morning's exertion, but he could not rest for long. He needed to continue guiding the cattle toward safer ground and away from the cliff edges. He took a deep breath, steadying himself, and scanned the area carefully. The bull that had caused so much trouble earlier stood apart from the rest of the herd, restless and tense. Its dark eyes darted toward the shadows of the canyon walls, and its muscles twitched as though ready to charge at any moment. Jed understood that the animal was reacting to something he could not yet see, and he knew that he needed to act carefully. One wrong move could trigger panic in the bull and endanger the entire herd. Jed moved slowly, keeping his eyes on the bull and the surrounding terrain. The ground beneath his boots was uneven, with loose rocks scattered across the path. Every step required full attention. He could feel the heat of the sun on his back and the wind whipping through the canyon, carrying the faint sound of distant rocks shifting. Jed knew the canyon could change in an instant, and he had to remain alert. He whispered to the bull in a calm voice, encouraging it to follow him, guiding it carefully toward a safer section of the canyon. As he advanced, Jed noticed a large rock above the path he had chosen. It was wedged precariously, almost as if it could tumble down at any moment. A shiver ran down his spine. He could feel the danger before he even touched the ground near it. Jed's mind raced with possibilities. If the rock fell, it could crush him or the bull, or even block the path entirely. He paused for a moment, calculating the safest way to proceed. There was no alternative route. He would have to pass beneath the rock. Carefully, Jed moved under the large stone, keeping his body low and his movements deliberate. He felt every vibration in the ground, every shift in the rocks. Dust and small pebbles fell around him, but he managed to remain unscathed. The bull followed hesitantly, trusting Jed's guidance. Jed spoke softly, soothing the animal while keeping a wary eye on the cliff above. He could feel the tension building, a sense that the canyon was preparing him for the true test yet to come. Suddenly, a loud crack split the air. Jed froze. A section of loose rocks above him had given way, tumbling toward the narrow path. He shouted a warning, and the bull jumped aside just in time. Jed's heart pounded as he moved quickly to a safer spot, narrowly avoiding the falling stones. The herd reacted instantly, scattering slightly but remaining under his control. Jed breathed heavily, realizing how close they had come to disaster. The canyon was teaching him a harsh lesson about respect, caution, and the unpredictability of nature. Jed pressed on, guiding the herd toward an even safer section of the canyon. The narrow path twisted and turned, sometimes opening into small clearings, sometimes narrowing to barely a foot of solid ground. Every step required vigilance. Jed could see faint cracks in the rock walls, indicating that more loose stones could fall at any moment. He moved deliberately, keeping a hand on the bull to calm it and speaking softly to the other cattle to keep them steady. Dusty followed closely, sensing the tension in Jed's movements. As he led the herd further into the canyon, Jed noticed another danger. A small cliff jutted out sharply near the path, and the ground beneath it seemed less stable than he expected. Loose stones shifted under his boots, and he realized that one wrong step could send him tumbling down the rocky slope. Jed's heart raced, but he did not panic. He had survived dangers before, and he trusted his experience and instincts to guide him now. Slowly he led the herd past the cliff, testing each step and making sure the path was secure. Halfway through the canyon, Jed saw movement in the shadows. He froze, scanning the area carefully. A mountain lion emerged from behind a rock, its golden eyes locked onto the herd. Jed felt a jolt of fear, but he knew that panic could be worse. He remained calm, standing tall and making himself appear larger. The mountain lion hesitated, eyeing Jed cautiously. Jed spoke in a low, firm voice, trying to assert control over the situation. Slowly, the animal backed away, disappearing into the canyon shadows. Jed exhaled slowly, realizing that his calmness had prevented disaster. But the canyon was not done testing him. As he moved further, Jed came to a steep slope leading to a narrow ledge. The herd needed to cross it to reach safer ground. Jed examined the ledge carefully. It was barely wide enough for one animal at a time, and the drop below was treacherous. Loose stones littered the path, and the wind howled through the canyon, threatening to throw off their balance. Jed knew that he had to guide the cattle carefully, one by one, without making sudden movements. He called the bull first, speaking softly and encouraging it to follow him. The animal hesitated, then stepped cautiously onto the ledge. Jed moved beside it, guiding it along with careful words and gentle pressure. The other cattle followed, moving slowly and carefully. Dusty watched nearby, ready to assist if needed. Jed's hands ached from constant tension and his heart raced with the responsibility he carried. Each step mattered. One slip could end everything. As the herd crossed the ledge, a sudden rumble echoed through the canyon. Jed's heart leapt into his throat. Above them, a section of rock had loosened. He shouted a warning and moved quickly to push the animals forward. Stones tumbled down the slope, narrowly missing him. The bull jumped, nearly losing its balance, but Jed caught it with a gentle push and a firm voice. Slowly, carefully, he guided the herd to the other side. Dust and debris filled the air, and the wind whistled through the canyon, carrying the sound of falling stones. Jed finally reached the flat area on the other side of the ledge, his muscles trembling from the exertion. The herd was safe, and for the moment the canyon seemed calm. Jed took a deep breath, surveying the landscape. The cliffs loomed above him, jagged and imposing, and he realized that the canyon's power was greater than he had imagined. He had survived the immediate danger, but he knew that more challenges awaited him. The canyon demanded respect, and he understood that even the most careful and experienced man could be tested again. As he rested, Jed thought about the warnings he had ignored. Don't do it," Mr. Harris had said. The words echoed in his mind. Jed understood now that pride and experience could not replace caution and respect. The canyon was alive, unpredictable, and dangerous. He had learned that overconfidence could be deadly, and that true skill lay in patience, observation, and careful action. Jed rose, feeling the tension in his muscles and the ache in his back. The herd needed to continue, and he had to guide them toward safety. He moved slowly, carefully, keeping his eyes on the terrain and every subtle movement of the animals. The canyon seemed to close in around him, shadows stretching long and dark, but Jed remained alert. He knew that the final test of the morning was approaching, and he had to be ready for anything. Halfway through the next section of the canyon, Jed spotted another hazard. A large boulder had shifted and partially blocked the path. Loose stones surrounded it, making it unstable. Jed assessed the situation carefully. He could try to move the boulder, but that might trigger more stones to fall. He realized that he would need to guide the herd around it, finding a narrow, safer route. Slowly and deliberately, he led the animals along the new path, carefully stepping over loose stones and encouraging the bull to stay calm. As they moved past the obstacle, Jed felt a sense of relief, though it was brief. The canyon had tested him repeatedly, and he understood that he had survived more by luck than by complete control. The herd remained close and Dusty followed faithfully, but Jed knew that the greatest danger had not yet passed. The canyon still held secrets, and he could feel that the final challenge of the day was near. By late afternoon, Jed finally led the herd to a larger, safer, flat area. The animals grazed calmly, and the bull had settled. Jed sank to the ground, exhausted, his muscles trembling and his heart still racing. He had survived the canyon's dangers for the moment, but the experience had left a deep impression. He realized that even the most careful man could be tested in ways he did not expect. The canyon was unpredictable, powerful, and unforgiving. Jed reflected on the morning's events. He had guided the herd through narrow ledges, avoided falling rocks, and confronted the unknown dangers of the canyon. He had faced fear, uncertainty, and the limits of his own skill. Yet he had survived. The experience had taught him a valuable lesson. Respect and caution were as important as courage and strength. Overconfidence could be deadly, and even the most experienced man could face danger if he ignored the signs. As the sun began to lower in the sky, Jed guided the herd toward a safer area near the edge of his ranch. The canyon loomed behind him, silent and imposing, a reminder of the dangers he had faced. He had survived, but the experience had changed him. He understood that the Wild West was not only a place of beauty and freedom, but also a place of hidden challenges and constant tests. Jed had faced the canyon and lived to see another day, but he knew that he would never forget the lessons it had taught him. Jed sat on the edge of his porch as the sun began to dip below the hills, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and gold. The air was calm now, carrying only the faint scent of grass and the distant sound of his cattle grazing peacefully. After the morning's ordeal in the canyon and the long day of guiding the herd through danger, he finally allowed himself a moment to rest. His body ached, every muscle stiff from exertion, but more than that, his mind was heavy with reflection. He thought about the canyon, the bull, and the countless narrow escapes that had tested him that day. For years, Jed had lived by his own confidence, trusting in his experience and instincts. He had faced storms, wild animals, and even bandits on rare occasions. He prided himself on his ability to handle danger, to think clearly under pressure, and to remain calm when others might panic. But today had been different. The canyon had reminded him, in the harshest way possible, that experience alone was not enough. Nature had its own rules, its own unpredictable ways, and even a skilled man could find himself at the mercy of forces beyond his control. As he watched the sky change colors, Jed thought back to Mr. Harris, the old neighbor who had warned him days before. Don't do it," the words echoed in his mind. Jed had smiled politely at the time, brushing off the caution as the worries of an old man, but now he understood. The warning had not been a superstition or fear, it had been wisdom. The canyon demanded respect. It tested those who approached it with pride and impatience, and it rewarded only those who were cautious, attentive, and humble in the face of its power. Jed stood slowly, stretching his stiff muscles, and walked toward the cattle. They were grazing quietly in the late afternoon sun, unaware of the danger they had faced. He patted the bull gently on the neck, whispering calm words to reassure the animal. The bull seemed to understand, its movements slow and relaxed now, a sign that it felt safe. Jed felt a wave of relief. The herd was safe, and for the first time since the morning, he allowed himself to feel a sense of accomplishment. Despite the relief, Jed could not shake the lesson the canyon had taught him. Overconfidence, he realized, was a dangerous companion. Pride could blind a man to the subtle signs of danger, to the hidden traps that nature placed in his path. He had survived because he had acted carefully, observed his surroundings, and remained patient. But luck, he knew, had played a role as well. A single mistake, a momentary lapse of attention, could have resulted in disaster. The thought made him shiver, but it also strengthened his resolve to be more mindful in the future. Jed spent the next hour checking the fences and water troughs near the edge of the canyon. He repaired small breaks, ensuring that the cattle could not wander too close to dangerous areas again. Every action was deliberate, every movement careful. The events of the day had instilled in him a new level of vigilance. He understood that responsibility was not just about guiding the herd. It was about anticipating potential dangers, respecting the land, and preparing for the unexpected. By the time he returned to his cabin, the sun had nearly disappeared behind the hills, leaving a soft twilight glow across the ranch. Jed lit a small lamp and sat at his kitchen table, cleaning the dust and dirt from his hands. He reflected on the canyon and the risks he had faced. The experience had changed him, not in the way of fear or hesitation, but in understanding. Courage, he realized, was not the absence of fear. It was acting despite fear, with care, thoughtfulness, and respect for the world around him. Later that evening, some neighbors came by to check on him. They had heard rumors about the canyon and Jed's dangerous morning adventure. When they saw him safe, tired but unharmed, they shook their heads in relief and admiration. Jed recounted the events calmly, describing the challenges he had faced, the loose rocks, the narrow ledges, and the restless bull. The townspeople listened intently, their faces a mixture of concern and awe. They asked questions, seeking to understand the canyon's dangers and Jed's methods for keeping the herd safe. Jed spoke honestly, emphasizing caution and respect. "The canyon isn't just rocks and cliffs," he said. "It's alive in its own way. It teaches you lessons if you pay attention. Pride and overconfidence can cost you dearly. You have to move carefully, watch closely, and never underestimate it." The townspeople nodded, understanding that Jed's words carried more weight than any story they had ever heard. His experience had turned into a lesson not just for him, but for everyone who lived near the canyon. Over the next few days, Jed continued his routine with a renewed sense of mindfulness. He checked the fences, tended to the cattle, and ensured that all paths near the canyon were secure. Every action was intentional, every decision informed by the lessons he had learned. He noticed small details more than before, the subtle cracks in rocks, the movement of shadows, the behavior of the animals. Even Dusty seemed to sense the new care in Jed's actions, moving calmly beside him and responding to his commands with quiet confidence. Jed also took time to share his story with the younger ranchers in town. He wanted them to understand the canyon's power and the importance of caution. He spoke of his mistakes, of the narrow escapes, and the dangers that could be avoided with careful observation. The young men and women listened closely, absorbing the wisdom Jed had gained through first-hand experience. His story became more than a tale of danger. It became a lesson in responsibility, humility, and the balance between courage and prudence. As the weeks passed, the canyon seemed less threatening, though its presence remained imposing. Jed often rode near its edge, observing quietly, making careful notes about the terrain and the animals' behavior. He had developed a deep respect for the land, understanding that the Wild West was a place of beauty and freedom, but also of hidden challenges. Every day he spent near the canyon reminded him of the lessons learned that one morning. Vigilance, patience, and respect were as important as skill and courage. Jed's life returned to its familiar rhythm, yet he was changed. The experience had instilled in him a deeper awareness of his surroundings, a stronger sense of responsibility for the herd, and a renewed respect for the unpredictable forces of nature. He no longer dismissed warnings lightly, and he no longer assumed that experience alone could protect him. Instead, he approached each day with careful attention, balancing confidence with caution and strength with humility. One evening, as Jed watched the sun set behind the canyon, he felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. He had survived the morning's trials, guided his herd to safety, and learned lessons that would stay with him for a lifetime. He thought about the young ranchers who had listened to his story, hoping that they too would carry the lessons forward. The canyon remained, silent and imposing, but Jed no longer saw it as merely dangerous. He saw it as a teacher, a reminder of the limits and responsibilities that came with life on the frontier. Jed knew that life on the ranch would always hold challenges, that storms, animals, and the rugged land would test him again. But he also knew that he was stronger for having faced the canyon's trials. The events of that morning had taught him the true meaning of courage, not recklessness, but careful determination, tempered by respect and observation. He understood that survival was not about ignoring danger, but about facing it with wisdom, patience, and humility. As night fell over Red Creek, the ranch settled into quiet calm. The stars began to appear, twinkling faintly above the hills, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of grass and earth. Jed stood near the edge of the canyon, looking out over the land he loved. The experience had been dangerous, exhausting, and frightening, yet it had given him something more valuable than safety or pride. It had given him understanding. He had learned that life was precious, that courage must be balanced with caution, and that even a strong, experienced man must respect the forces beyond his control. Jed turned back toward his cabin, satisfied that the herd was safe, the ranch secure, and the lessons of the canyon firmly embedded in his mind. He knew that the canyon would always be there, silent and powerful, a constant reminder of the balance between courage and wisdom. He smiled softly, feeling a sense of peace he had never felt before. The day had been long, difficult, and full of lessons, but he had survived, and he had grown stronger, wiser, and more aware of the true responsibilities of life on the ranch. The canyon, once a source of unease, had become a teacher, and Jed McAllister, the proud and determined rancher, had learned to listen, to observe, and to respect its power. The Wild West remained a place of freedom, beauty, and danger, but Jed faced it with a new understanding, carrying the lessons of that fateful morning in his heart forever.